portfolio holders' views around that. And then in relation to the Brook Theatre, which is on page 33, the last item on in part 7 of the report, in relation to the spending of the Levelling Up Fund, it says here the Brook Theatre has also secured 6.5 million from Levelling Up Fund. A design team has been appointed ensuring a holistic approach with both funding streams. What is the design team doing, and what do you mean by holistic approach is my question there. And then my final question, if I may, Chair, is in relation to, it's actually paragraph 10 of the report. It's just a question about the river strategy, which was commissioned some time ago, and I wondered if the portfolio holder has any information on when that is going to be published. That's my questions for the moment. Thank you very much, Chair.
Rodney, could you use your mic, please?
We'll start with the last one first. The river strategy, as I understand it, is due for consultation, and I look at the... Let me just make a point. I am not responsible for delivering these schemes. I am responsible to making sure that the money is spent in the way that we made the bid for it and is in the time, because most monies that we achieve is time limited, and my role is to make sure, because I have to report back to the various funders that we are meeting the times and we are spending the money according to the bid. So I go to the director, the assistant director, who will be able to update you on all these, because he's responsible for actually delivering these projects.
Rodney, you should drop your microphone for the moment, please. Rodney?
Yep.
So just answering your question in terms of the Pentagon Centre, Councillor Curry, Healthy Living Centre, the work is ongoing. It's never easy, because obviously we're trying to make the best in terms of public money for both the NHS and the ICB side, as well as the council. Obviously it's a great idea to put it on the first floor, the most accessible part of Chatham, if you like, both in terms of train and bus. So there's a very worthy cause there, and also obviously bringing more footfall to the town centre. So we're currently designing that up with the ICB. They're currently confirming their full business case for the funding, and we are hoping that we will be opening, if you like, a Healthy Living Centre in 2024, from mid-2024 onwards. So we're currently working through that, so I don't have the full details, because it is challenging, it is difficult, but we are working together with the ICB, and we are moving forward with that. In terms of the public realm contractor, yeah, we are going through the procurement processes at the moment, and we do expect to appoint very shortly in April. So again, we don't see any issues there, but we're just going through the appropriate processes internally. Debenhams, we acquired it originally, again, this was more around a regeneration approach, where obviously Debenhams were closing all across the country. Future High Street Fund came up as an opportunity shortly after our Debenhams closed. It was more about securing that site, because what we didn't want was the current owners. They were the owners previously, they were based in the US. Obviously, they've got a huge portfolio of properties. They've probably been quite happy to have sat there for 10, 15 years plus, waiting for things to pick up again. So it was about being proactive and ensuring that we had control of the site first and foremost, which we managed to do via the Future High Street Fund. What we're doing now is, the council should only really intervene when we need to. So first we need to test the market, and that's what we're doing at the moment. If the market can intervene and can make something happen with Debenhams, that's where we should go. If they can't, we'll look at other options and whether or not the council can move forward with something directly. So that's the process we're in at the moment. In terms of the Brook Theatre and the holistic approach, obviously when we looked at the Future High Street Fund, it was a much more modest amount of money that we went for. We then obviously went for a higher amount in terms of the Levelling Up Fund. In terms of the Future High Street Fund, we went for what was appropriate and what we could do. Now, in terms of a holistic approach, instead of obviously looking at them separately as two separate projects, it obviously makes sense, and we've agreed with both funders that we would put the money together and obviously get more bang for our buck and have a more joined up approach to what we actually provide from within the Brook.
And what is the money being used for?
So essentially, there's a number of outputs relating to getting in new creatives, businesses in there. So it's releasing space in there, so there's some space that's not being used properly or is not appropriate, and then also there's an element around the creative digital sector, so essentially adding to our offer within the Brook Theatre.
If I can just come back there, and as I understand it, that's £6.5 million worth of money being spent on those two areas. Is that the kind of, I mean, I'm ignorant of in this particular area. Is that kind of cost that's involved here, creating those spaces? Is this more about refurbishing an old building? Thank you.
Just to be clear, obviously there are elements where it is an old building, so obviously we need to make it fit for purpose, but definitely the main thrust of it is around creating new spaces and more fit for purpose spaces for the creatives, digital creatives.
Thank you. Any other member? Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I'm back to the Brook Theatre. I was under the impression that there is serious remedial work that needs to be done, and if I recall rightly, there was going to be an assessment of that work done before we actually committed to what we were doing next. Has that been completed, and are we satisfied that the integrity of the building has been protected? Because I believe that there was something to do with ingress of water in the basement and substructure.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Brown. So yes, we are reviewing the integrity of the building at the moment. We've had an initial survey that says there's no immediate danger, so obviously if there was, we would obviously act immediately. We're closing the building anyway as part of the upstairs work, and also looking at intrusive surveys for the structure. And over the coming months, over the next 3 months, we expect to know that answer, but it's all timed with us needing to close upstairs anyway and do the upstairs work. So we've managed to program it so we can review both at the same time. And obviously if there is an extra demand, we would then come back to the council if necessary.
That part of the 6 million then?
No, the 6 million is separate. That's purely for upstairs.
Councillor Stamp.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Councillor Chambers, and thank you for the report. I wanted to ask a few questions around the Levelling Up Fund. As you probably know, the 6 Gillingham Labour councillors submitted a letter of support as part of the Open Lines bid, and we were disappointed, obviously, as I'm guessing you were, that we were unsuccessful not only in that bid, but in terms of the Innovation Park Medway bid too. It's been highlighted in the press quite widely that local authorities at best who had already received funding in round 1 were disadvantaged, but at worst were never going to be successful in the whole bidding process, regardless of how good the bids were. And it's also been in the press this week that the council spent £140,000 preparing those bids. So the more we hear from the government in relation to this Levelling Up Fund, the more worrying it is in terms of how it's being managed. So it'd be good to get your thoughts on what the government's position is, whether you've had any feedback yet. When the report was written, it said that the council hadn't yet received feedback on the 2 bids, but I'd appreciate it if you could provide us with any feedback, if you have received any, and what the reasoning was, and whether you've been given any clarity around the bidding process, because it calls into question whether we should have even bothered at all with either of those bids.
If we had known that the government, the problem that the government had, as I understand it, is that it had got grossly in excess in bids than the amount of money that was allocated. I think something like 4.8 billion nationally was allocated, and I think they had bids from right across the country which were 2.5 times the amount of money that they had got available. Now, I'm not giving that an excuse, I'm just saying that's what happened. So, and I can only presume that they certainly didn't tell us before we put the bid in that we weren't likely to get it. Because there'd been oversubscription, or that we received the 14 million in the first round, and that because of that, we were unlikely to receive anything in the second round. I mean, I know you mentioned 148k, but it does, if you probably analysed the costs we have to go through or to expend to make bids, it will apply to nearly all the different bidding streams that we, and I've led on, have made a bid. It is just unfortunate that this time we weren't successful. But and also the most frustrating thing about it is that whenever we put in a bid against any fund, we work with the department to make sure that we meet all the bidding criteria and what they will expect. Because my view is, if we can't meet that criteria, then we won't put a bid in. And that has always been the case as far as particularly Growth Fund, is that it's the strength of our bids that have secured the funding, and the bids have always been strong because they've met the criteria that is laid down by the various departments that are dealing with those bids. And I've always said the strength that comes from Medway is the strength of its bids, and that's why we have been considerably successful, particularly in the area of the Growth Fund. I'm very disappointed about the Gillingham one, because again we worked with the department every step of the way, and we were never given any reason to believe that we'd erred on any of the requirements. In other words, it was another strong bid. But the government made that decision. It as a SOP, because I consider it to be a SOP, it's now announcing that there will be a third round. But we need to be very wary of making a bid until we know what assurances we will get if we meet all the bidding criteria. In other words, another strong bid. My view is that, and we haven't got an answer to this one, have we, Sonny, as to whether we can actually resubmit the bids in round 2 for round 3.
So our contact in DLUC has mooted things like that there may be an opportunity that round 2 bids are resubmitted in terms of round 3. There may even be the opportunity that round 3 just looks at the bids that were unsuccessful in round 2. There's a number of permutations, and we've been told informally as well that they're happy to sit down and go through both projects in detail. So they've given us some limited written feedback, which essentially says that they were both strong bids. Gillingham, close to my heart as a resident of Gillingham, was a particularly strong one, a very popular one, but again, it was never going to be successful anyway. But what they've suggested is that we sit down and have some more verbal feedback when round 3 announcement comes out, so that it's relevant to round 3. So I take that as a positive, that they're expecting Medway to put forward some more strong bids based on the 2 that we've already submitted, Gillingham in particular. But again, that's going to be down to decisions further up the chain that are political rather than by the officers that I deal with.
Thank you. If I may, Chair, just to follow up on that, there's quite a lot to unpack there. In terms of the reasoning from the government, it seems like a bit of a feeble excuse that they were overwhelmed with bids, given that local authorities have been starved of cash for the last 13 years. It shouldn't have come as any surprise whatsoever that everybody's scrambling for every single penny that they can get. So I don't really accept that as a reason or an excuse. So any feedback that we do get, it would be really helpful if that was something in writing, so we've got something concrete to go on, rather than just these verbal conversations which can be twisted in the future. And in terms of round 3, if it is the case that we won't be able to resubmit the 2 bids that already submitted as part of round 2, then I really do think that as a local authority, we should be trying to recover the costs that we incurred during the round 2 bidding process, because I'm not surprised that it's 140,000. I wasn't critical of the council in spending that to submit and prepare the bids, but it's not an insignificant sum of money, and for us to just throw that down the drain because we're not going to be able to resubmit those bids for round 3, I don't think is an acceptable position from the government. So it'd be useful to get your views on that. I think it would be useful if this committee could receive that feedback from the round 2 bid process when it is received from the Levelling Up department. And just moving on from that, I think we also need to be kept updated on round 3 of the Levelling Up Fund. I think it'd be really helpful if members were kept in the loop as to what the options are and what the opportunities are for this council. Councillor Chambers, linking in with the Levelling Up Fund, I just wanted to ask one other question around the Future High Streets Fund. We've had several conversations in the past around the council's bid for Chatham, fully supportive of that. Have any other rounds of funding been announced for the Future High Streets Fund? As you know, been a long proponent of Gillingham.
Not that I'm aware of at the moment. You mean for... I remember back that they said at the time, or I said at the time at one of these yearly excursions into the committee, that when we got the original High Street Fund for Chatham, I said that we would make a bid for Gillingham, and at that time we were given the possibility there was going to be another round 2. I'm not sure that promise was made at that time based on information from whoever was in government at that particular time. I'm not aware that the present administration has given any consideration to another round of the High Street Fund. That's why we put great credence on the round 2 bid for the Great Lines, because of course it did impact on Gillingham High Street, as well as the greening the way down to the which Peel were going to put some match funding in, down the old railway line down to the development at the bottom. So there was going to be a benefit, and see a benefit for Gillingham High Street, but I'm not aware that there's a future round for the High Street Fund. And your guess, I'm afraid, is as good as mine at the moment.
Okay, thank you. That's it from me, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. There's been a request from Councillor Stamp to get feedback. I think we may have a slight issue in terms of getting that feedback for the future of this committee. So what I would suggest with Councillor Stamp's approval is that we actually, this committee in future gets a briefing note rather than a verbal report coming to this committee. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, that's fine by me, thank you.
And I know Sonny wants to come back in.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm, Councillor Chambers, Councillor Stamp, government did confirm that Future High Street Fund had disappeared and it was all about the levelling up agenda. So that, unless there is another change in policy, which is not, impossible, they've clearly made the statement to us at officer level, it wasn't a public thing, that the Future High Street Fund was now the Levelling Up Fund, and that was it. And again, it's not uncommon. The Community Renewal Fund was meant to be a precursor for the Shared Prosperity Fund, for the bigger pots, but then the Community Renewal Funds were basically totally unconnected to the Shared Prosperity Fund when government released the SPF, and they've moved on. So there is a pattern sometimes of things moving on, and that's also happened with the Future High Street Fund, just to clarify.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Edwards, followed by Councillor Lammers, followed by Councillor Mrs. Turpin.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Chambers. I've got 2 questions. The first one is in respect of the paddock. So this is on page 32 of the report. It mentions that the design has been changed due to the impact of inflation and it's being put out to tender for a second time. I'm wondering if you can tell us what those changes are to the design. And I'm also interested in any information you have about the costs for the maintenance of the fountain that was in the original proposal, if that has indeed made it into the second version of the design. Because I do support the paddock. You know, I went to the site visit that we had, and I think it will look, it would be a great addition. But the area that I did have a concern was that fountain, because I think it's all very well bidding for these one-off pots of money, small pots of money that we have from the government, an approach I don't entirely agree with. But when there's ongoing costs, you know, I think that they really need to be factored into the decision-making process. And when we did that site visit, nobody was able to tell me how much the ongoing cost would be for maintenance of that fountain. So we'd appreciate any information you could provide on that and the design changes for the second tender. And then the second area that I had a question about was in respect of Innovation Hub Medway. On the same page, it mentions a feasibility study being done. And I'm quite interested in obviously the outcome of that study, but also how you're engaging with the business community and colleges in Medway and any other interested parties in Medway, because really I want to make sure that it's shaped in such a way that it's really fulfilling the need for the startups in Medway, and would like to have a little bit more of an understanding about any particular industries or sectors that you're focusing on and what your kind of vision is for that innovation hub. Thank you.
Rodney, do you want to put your microphone on, please?
Yeah, I don't deliver them.
Thank you for your questions. On the paddock, the design change, it's in terms of just basic value engineering. So we're looking at materials. So in terms of whether or not we can reduce the quality of materials, but they're still make them fit for purpose. We are talking about our aspirational city centre. So obviously we're still trying to keep that quality. So I think we've managed to do that with the new design. Also, we've unfortunately had to reduce on some of the more artistic and interpretative elements on the site. So where we may have had more interpretation, use of old timbers and so on and so forth, unfortunately, some of that we've had to reduce, but however, there is still some interpretation on it. And I think what we've managed to keep is an overall presence of a city centre, because obviously this is another piece of the jigsaw whereby that combined with the public realm that's going to be delivered as part of the Chatham waterfront development site on the other side of the bus station gives us that gateway and that sense of arrival and city centre feel, if you like. So we have made some changes as just described, but we still have retained that element, that element of quality and sense of arrival. I think a part of that, and it's difficult to differentiate it from our perspective in terms of the master planning, looking at it, sitting down and looking at what makes a city centre. The water feature, if you like, we rather say feature rather than fountain. People tend to think of it as a sort of traditional kind of like statue of some sort of water coming out of it. This is something that is much more modern and low cost in terms of it's more around sort of jets that come out of the ground. They can be switched off if needed, not only to save money, but also so the area can be used for a performance area. If you remember, the designers are very much around outdoor events and seating around that area. So again, when we deliver the Mountbatten House in the fullness of time, there's a plaza that's going to be opposite that as well. So it's still a part of the jigsaw that's not quite complete. So all of that together, including the water feature, for us is, in terms of the master plan design, provides that city centre. You're absolutely right. We have to look at the maintenance of that, and we're going through it at the moment in terms of the costs, and we are looking at how we can fund that in terms of part of it potentially could be funded from the funding in terms of like a commuted sum and other elements. So we are looking at that at the moment. I don't have a figure for you, but we're conscious of it and we are planning for it, and it will be maintained. What won't happen is it won't be a one-off thing and then be closed in a year because it's not maintained. We will find the right appropriate money to do that.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Just in terms of the paddock redesign, can you just confirm that the sort of landscaping and the central heart of the design is still the same? And I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what you meant in terms of maybe some of the other changes about I think you mentioned some wood changing. I didn't quite understand that, so if you could just explain a little bit more. Thank you.
So some elements where we've wanted to use reclaimed timber that have the historic element in terms of from, say, the old shipyards and elements like that. That's more expensive. That in time will also will need replacing. Things like that we've had to cut. And in general, in terms of the general space and how much space there is in terms of the green, the ecological elements have not been reduced at all, because obviously that's very important Councillor Curry, you had a query around that, so that is remaining the same. Things like the entrance outside the side entrance of the Pentagon, that's changed slightly in terms of the materials that we're using. We were going to look at some Corten steel along the front. We've had to reduce that. That obviously helps in terms of the budget. But in terms of the overall feel, and your question around that kind of hard and soft mix and the feel of it is still retained in the design.
Thank you. Councillor Lammas.
Just to go back on Councillor Andy Stamp's point about the levelling up bid fiasco with round 2, I'll defer to your greater experience and any advice on the council, but I'm very happy pending the result of a return to this council of some advice to do a joint letter or something, or use any mechanism that's available to us cross-party to ask the government for return of funding, that in the event that round 3 can't take a carbon copy of round 2. I want to put on record I found that the decision at the last minute was appalling, and I think it is a disgrace.
Thank you. Councillor Elizabeth Turpin.
Thank you, Chair. One of my questions was the same as Councillor Lammas. I wanted to, just as a recommendation from this committee, that we would be applying for that 140,000 back, but I appreciate we've got to wait for the criteria of the round 3 first. So my other question was regards to the Debenhams. So I know you mentioned earlier in your introduction or an answer to another question, Councillor Chambers, that the fund is often time limited. So I'm just sort of concerned with regards to sort of the Debenhams and the future high street funds, sort of what I assume that we had to put sort of forward a future plan for that building. And did that sort of include putting it back on the market and testing the market, and also what is our sort of time frame? You know, are we going to be liable in the future if we've not moved on with this? And what is our future sort of plan if this doesn't work out?
Rodney, can you put your mic on, please?
The Debenhams site was not part of the bid for the High Street Fund initially, because Debenhams wasn't closed when we first put the bid in. And what we did, and I think Sonny has already alluded to the fact, we sought permission in order to secure the site from the department to use part of the fund which was obtained to purchase that building. Sonny, correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you, Councillor. So, there is a commitment for the downstairs, so we need to try and find a use for the downstairs, but it doesn't, as Rodney was alluding to, actually relate to the upstairs. Now, obviously, we want to do something with the upstairs. We're obviously looking at, hopefully, a mixed-use development. That's what we've gone out to the market. We've asked for bids for both separate downstairs, separate upstairs and combined, because we are literally sort of testing the waters, if you like. But March 25 is our drop-dead date to have something, if you like, operating from the ground floor. But that's a much smaller obligation, if you like, than upstairs. That's not to say we don't want to deliver the whole building, but obviously we've got to test the market and see what's out there first. But March 25 is the drop-dead date at the moment. But of course, we'll have to see, we'll look at it, and obviously if there's anything else that we need to do, we go back to the funder as we always do, and if we need to renegotiate, we will. But at this stage, we've got time, we will see what the market comes back with.
Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you. For yourself, Councillor Chambers, can I ask the Assistant Director something about 5.1? That is the finalisation of the Station Approach Road, following the flooding there last week, which is quite severe, of the old Station Approach Road. I wonder if the Assistant Director can update me on when we'd like to see agreement to have the new Station Approach Road fixed into the station.
We shall see, but thank you, Councillor, for your Hubbard, for your question. We have finally, so just to be clear here, I don't want to throw Network Rail under the bus or train or whatever it might be, but this has been, we've obviously been trying to get, if you like, the land released for the access to that car park for a long time. It's been a frustration of your own as well, Councillor, and you've obviously tried to help and support us and push where you can in terms of Network Rail. We now have done a swap effectively, whereby they have now released, if you like, the new approach, or the road to nowhere, as you glibly called it previously. It is now the road to a car park, which we now own. However, the only caveat I will give to that is that in order to finalise, if you like, the junction between our border and their border and make it a road that can be used, it involves a licence and possibly a BAPA, an agreement with Network Rail, which we are now pushing for. So obviously any support, further support to get that through would be appreciated. We are pushing it as hard as we can at this stage in terms of the legals. So we are there in terms of the legal element of that road. We can now use it to access their car park. It is now the actual works and doing them on the site, which we're ready to do. We are now negotiating with Network Rail to allow us to do those works.
Can I just come back? I thought there was something afoot because last week I had complained about the flooding of the old existing station approach, and I said you need to approach so our highways drainage people, you need to approach Network Rail, or why don't you speak to Sunny E's team? And they did, and they found out that the council actually owns the old station approach road and we can get those drains clear. You say you're going to go into we've bought a car park.
Sorry, in terms of so we're talking about the new approach. So in terms of the Network Rail station car park, yeah?
So the new approach goes into the forecourt.
Yeah.
Doesn't go into the car park.
Apologies, yeah.
So you're just looking for access into the forecourt, and then they'll have to rearrange the parking spaces, etc., etc.
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent.
Councillor Curry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to come back in. It's just a question really around resourcing for the work that we've heard described. I know in part 9 of the report, you talk about the, if I can remind myself again, the locating Kent relationship that we have, and that's going to cost us another £70,000 over the coming year, because that's now a commitment that we've made. In terms, presumably that's staff time, is what I can see here. And the locating Kent, the purpose behind that is about inward investment and stuff like that. I'm listening to the assistant director talking about I think the only word to describe is a plethora of projects. Is that a good word for the week or something like that? Or that you're currently having to deal with, not simply in the centre of Chatham, but then taking in Strood Waterfront. I know that you've got the HIF remit and stuff like that. I'm just wondering about resourcing for the section, that area of your portfolio, of the portfolio of work that you've got to cover. I mean, how is that working out? Because there are a lot of projects going on now. The Debenham site has been added in since the middle of last year as well, trying to sort that out, trying to get the Pentagon finished, etc., etc. I mean, how are you resourced for that, or is it just is the sort of toast very thinly buttered at the moment? Thank you, Chair.
So thank you, Councillor Curry. I think I can always do with more resource. Council, everyone in not just Regeneration can always do with more resource. We are managing things, if you like. We also do have, I'm going to report on the Shared Prosperity Fund later on in the agenda, but for example, where we have external funding, we try and ensure that we include in that bid resourcing, if you like, to bring in extra resource to help deliver those projects, because absolutely, as the projects grow, we need to grow our team, and then obviously as the projects shrink, then obviously if those teams are associated with those projects, we can shrink and expand as needed. Currently where we are, to be honest with you, the biggest issue is just recruitment, because half the land has got LUF, Shared Prosperity Fund and so on and so forth. So the level of officers that I need in terms of that level, that delivery level, town centre managers, etc. There's a lot of jobs out there and not enough people, if you like. So our biggest risk at the moment, to be honest with you, is recruitment. So we do have funding. I can always do with more. But we do have funding. Our biggest risk at the moment is recruitment. So that's what we're working on at the moment. We're working with colleagues in HR around trying to make us as attractive as possible a place to work. But that's our biggest risk at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies, I realise I didn't receive a second response to my question around the Innovation Hub Medway. So this was about the feasibility study and the vision for the hub, and what engagement you were having with the business community and colleges to make sure that it was shaped in such a way that it was sort of fulfilling the need for startups in Medway.
Yeah, so apologies for that. I just noticed that on my list. So at the moment we have got a potential tenant, if you like, who will run that innovation hub for us. So going back to Councillor Curry's point about resource, we did look at could we run it as a council. Realistically, no, because by the time you try and recruit someone, get them in, etc. So we went out to procure an organisation who's come in with a bid, essentially using that space for startups. There is an element around, because of the nature of the space and because of the location, digital, obviously, because it's not going to be a place for advanced manufacturing and so on and so forth. So definitely, again, not stepping on the toes of the creative industries in the Brook, but we're expecting a combination of sort of digital elements as well, the innovation hub, and we're obviously working together to make sure that those startups are complementary in terms of the town centre. This is very much about seeding the town centre, so again, bringing those startups, bringing that footfall, bringing that innovation right into the heart of our most sort of accessible area in terms of trains and buses. Now, at the moment, we're designing it up with the tenants, so we're still in the stages of designing it up. We have started something called Business for Medway, so it's a forum for local businesses. And I think, just thinking aloud, so in answer to your sort of question, how many people have we consulted? Not as many as we could, probably, and we're still in the early stages, and we'll look at going to places like Business for Medway as a forum to perhaps talk about the innovation hub and talk about spreading the word. And obviously, Councillor, if you've got any particular ideas or contacts you want to give us, we can do that as well. But at the moment, we're in the design stages. It will be what it is in terms of the resourcing. We'll look at maybe if we've got 3D printers, spaces, hot desks, that kind of thing. But again, how we populate it, absolutely open to suggestions, and we have got more consultation to go through. All right.
Councillor Rupert Turpin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rodney, for this report. I want to just focus on the Strood Riverside development because I think it's an iconic location. It's opposite Rochester Cathedral and Rochester Castle, so it's even more suitable location for a wonderful development than Rochester Riverside in some respects. We've had a bit of trouble getting this off the ground, and it looks like if perhaps we could get some idea of where we're going with this, because it's saying that we're appointing PBTW to work on the design, and then they'll be resubmitting a grant funding bid to one public estate. So does this mean that it's not viable still? There's no commitment from MDC to build there unless they get extra monies in via a grant funding bid? Or would it mean if we got the grant funding bid in, would we then go back out to the private sector and say, you know, as we did before, let's have your bids and see who can pay us the most money to develop for the rights to develop this site? So what sort of direction are we going in on that one?
Rodney, put your mic on, please.
About where we are and where we would have liked to have been. When I moved my administration moved the off of the civic site into this building, land values were considerable. Indeed, the land value of that site was equivalent to the purchase price of this building, and that's what we were going to cover, the purchase of this building. Land values dropped away, and as far as developers are concerned, you know that we went out twice to secure a developer for that site, and on both occasions there was insufficient margins for interest to be shown, or interest was to be shown, but the return to the council, in fact in one instance, was we weren't going to get any return at all. So for a while, first of all, we had to secure the site, and that is mentioned in here, the defence, the money. And then we decided that the way forward was to, for want of a better word, develop it ourselves through MDC. And now, Sonny, you can tell us where we are.
Thank you, Councillor. So at the moment, obviously, we're trying to do the front end, which is basically come up with a viable development, get the planning for it, and essentially deliver it through MDC. That is the intent. Things may or may not change. So I think your initial question around, we're going for OPE, does that mean it's not viable? And if we don't get the OPE, are we therefore in trouble? No. So again, Rodney's point was around, Councillor Chambers' point was around the capital receipt wasn't considered enough. MDC, we obviously take a share of their profits. So obviously it would make sense that therefore we would get a larger capital receipt by using MDC to do that. And again, what was proposed wasn't really in the best interest of the public in terms of the private sector. So unless things change significantly, that is where we will remain. It's not that it's unviable, but it would be even more viable with an OPE. And again, there's an element of opportunism there, because if there is money going that can help and ticks the boxes for government, why wouldn't council do it? So it's more around opportunity. Obviously a greater capital receipt, but there is still a receipt and still a project, regardless of whether or not we get the OPE at the current economic climate.
Can I just ask, PBTW did the design for Rochester Riverside, and they may have been the people that took us for a walk round and with as members and did a bit of work on that. So we did get a bit of input. So I'm wondering if that would be possible for members to do that again, because I really think could be an iconic site, and we really deserve to have something really fantastic across the river from the castle and the cathedral.
Yeah, that's something I can take back. Yep.
Councillor Hubbard.
Talking about the Civic Centre site, of course, it was an volcanic site, because when we had the Avon Porting building there, this wonderful gateway building into Strood, it could have kick-started the redevelopment of the old Civic Centre site. The buildings adjacent, which were the former offices of the factory offices, could have come down no problem, but the lovely building that was the Port and Aveling headquarters, the council decided to demolish. So I wasn't going to ask you about your regrets since you've taken over this portfolio position, but is that one of them? That maybe the wrong decisions were taken back in, 2008, 2009, to knock down a building that could have kick-started the regeneration of the Civic Centre site without this nonsense of the wall and such like in other issues. Because you could have made the money there and then, rather than now not having made, as you say, a firm investment.
Councillor Chambers, that's really not part of your brief here. So I'm more than happy if you want to give a yes or no answer, and that's it.
Well, all I was going to say, Chairman, was that there were different circumstances at that particular time, and
That's not a yes or no.
No, I was just going to say there were different circumstances, different financial circumstances, and indeed we had major development, Barclay and Countryside, who were all clamouring to take on that site, to do precisely what has been said by the member there. It's an iconic site. It's a site which warrants an iconic development. I mean, people would give their high teeth to live opposite the castle and the cathedral, the view out there. But at the time that the councillor was talking about, the one thing was that the building on it was a relatively small footprint. It wasn't, in my view, an iconic building. It was a historic building because it was the offices of Aveling and Porter. But in order to maximise the return on that site, that building had to go.
So that's a yes.
So that's a yes.
The member. Councillor Teed.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Chambers. Just a quick one with regards to the reduction in the funding for locating Kent, with the ERD dropping off at the end of next month. What impact do you think that will have on us going forward in terms of attracting business, especially foreign investment on the limited budget?
I don't think it will make a great deal of impact, in as much that the one thing we were, years ago, we were a bit player as far as locating Kent is concerned. And then we managed to secure, I'm talking Kent County Council and ourselves, some European funding to support locating Kent. And we made, the Kent County Council made a contribution. Now, at the time, when we agreed that we needed greater emphasis. I tried at the time, because I thought that the name should be changed to Locating Kent and Medway. Didn't win that argument. So the criteria that I laid down was I wanted equal marketing as far as Locating Kent is concerned, as far as Medway and the rest of Kent, and that we got. And whether you like it or not, one of the big ones was attracting Amazon here, and therefore it then put us into and they're involved in the marketing as far as the Uniper site is concerned. And I think we get good value for the 70,000 that we pay them, and I don't believe there will be any diminution of efforts on Locating Kent. It's a matter for horses for courses. In other words, where there are sites, whether they're in Medway or Kent, to fit the requirements of the hopeful investor, then that is what Locating Kent will go after, rather than saying, well, we want them to be somewhere in Kent, or rather than Medway.
Thank you. Any other member? There being no other member, Rodney, you're not disappearing yet. You have one more question from me. So I think you've made quite a strong case that you are the person that attracts funds in or puts the bidding in, looks at the criteria, you looks at the finance to make sure the money's been spent as opposed to it being wasted. You're ensuring that the money is actually spent on that project, and a lot of them are time limited. So can you tell me what involvement you had for the new routes to good growth, or otherwise known as the HIF project? Okay, thank you very much for that answer. That being the end of the session for your good self, I thank you for being here this evening. As far as I'm aware, in terms of recommendations, we only have one. I'll be handing over to the Vice Chairman for that. And in addition to the recommendation, we have a briefing note that's going to be supplied by the Assistant Director for Regeneration. So on that basis, I'm handing over to the Vice Chairman.
Chairman, is it the recommendation is for, I thought that was a recommendation for the briefing note.
No, the recommendation is that this committee writes in to get a refund on the money that we paid for the bid to.
Well, that was to be based on what was said on the feedback which would be provided in the briefing note. If the feedback was that we couldn't resubmit them, then we would write that letter. We won't write the letter unless we get that in the briefing note confirmed.
Okay, that's fine. Is that agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
And I'm sorry that the report was so long, and but I believe this will act as a briefing paper to whoever does this job after the election, because as you know, some of you know, after 50 years being elected member in local government, I am retiring this term, and so I wish you all well and for the future, and I'll be very interested to see what transpires after the election.
Thank you very much.
As Vice Chair, can I propose a vote of thanks for Councillor Rodney Chambers for 50 years of service in local government in many capacities, right up to the very top. Thank you, Rodney.
Right, if members would like literally a 5-minute comfort break, then we will start that 5 minutes now. Agenda item 7. We have the attendance of the portfolio holder for business management. Once again, it's my usual spiel. You've all had the opportunity to read the papers, and no doubt you have scrutinised them carefully. So I'll go straight to members' questions, please. Any member? Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful for being called first. My questions relate to waste and litter. Everyone knows Prince's Park. Councillors are obsessed with more bins, more trees and more flowers, and the tarting up of the 2 roundabouts. First question is waste warden visits. These all pertain to 3.4 and onwards, page 47 onwards in the report, which I'm grateful for the report. Sorry, I should say that. I'm grateful for the report. The first question I have is waste warden visits. Can we get a breakdown by ward of where these waste warden do their monitoring visits, please? Second question regards to the standards of street inspections, which is on page 48, 3.5.2. This is something that I've read previously in a different capacity. The results of 98, 97, 96% all being considered grade A seems to me that the standards are too low, because when you have something persistently showing almost 100% grade A all the time, when I know that litter is a problem in different parts of Medway, that would suggest to me that requires reviewing. So my second question to you would be, what's the deal with those standards? Third question relates to the evaluation of on-street litter bin locations. I read with interest, Chair, that according to table 6 on page 49, Prince's Park, and I may be mistaken here, but it seems to me that Prince's Park is owed 28 bins, but 20 of them we won't get back, only 8 of them we will get back. So I would like clarity over the state of play with bins. Bins in Prince's Park, particularly on Heron Ray, is the #1 priority for my residents, and it is a serious problem, the litter, persistent, perennial problem, because there is a lack of bins, particularly along Heron Way. There is just not enough bins. I would love to get to a situation where you can see the next bin from every bin location. That would be, like, to me, the gold standard, but I don't expect that. But can I have clarity over the bins, please, and particularly the 20 that have been deemed not suitable, because, and this relates to my next question, question 4, I have the Lawswood and Waterslade Community Litter Picking Group in my ward, led by the very capable and very determined Mary, and they have a volunteer force who'd happily undertake an audit of the audit. So I'd like to know the locations of these sites as assessed on a map, so that Mary and her team can go around and check if indeed the sites are now unsuitable for these bins to be returned, please. Relating to that, my fourth question is about support for these litter picking groups. Councillors in Lawswood and Waterslade area are persistently now supplying special stickers we co-designed with the group, which have a QR code, etc. And I would like to ask you, where provisions are made on a routine, ongoing basis, is there not a mechanism to move them so that the council can just supply with them directly on an ongoing, rolling basis? So that, for example, they'll just know they'll get these stickers every 6 months delivered, so we don't have to keep procuring again and again and again. Because, I mean, I procured them myself, and then the council officer procured them 3 times the cost, same stickers. So there needs to be some work there done. My final question, Chair, question 5, relates to 3.23 on page 54, which is about data collection. I love the QR code scheme on the bins. I think it's amazing. And I really do appreciate the small, dedicated team of Medway Council officers who are responsible for waste collection and cleansing services, and they do a fantastic job. My question, therefore, is how soon can we get hold of the data? The data must exist already, and the data is new, because they're now getting data Medway-wide, precisely on which bins are overflowing. So how soon can the councillors get hold of that data to see which areas need more resource allocation in terms of greater provision of bins being emptied on a regular basis? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lammas. So we'll start with the waste wardens and where do they do their inspections. We can get a list of the streets that are coming for the inspections. That's not That's not a problem. The NI 195 is a national standard, so we don't have any influence on that standard. It's a national standard, and we just do it in accordance with the national standard. So we can't change the standard. The bins back, well, we undertook an audit of all bins. There are many bins in in Medway that have dual bins at the site, for example. They have a dog bin right next to a waste bin, and since 2013, dog waste and litter does not have to be separate. So I should imagine that some of the bins that were removed were dog bins that were next to a litter bin or within a few paces of a litter bin that were unnecessary. Also, mobility scooters seem to have grown as exponentially as the size of cars as well, and they could be causing obstruction on some pavements because mobility scooters have got a lot larger. So it was also the safety of residents as well that was taken into consideration. So when they've inspected those bins, I know in my ward, you know, there was an old Gillingham Borough Council dog bin, and within 3 metres there was a dual bin. It was unnecessary, so it was removed. You know, so I know that those sort of standards were looked at and things like that. Your next question was, can you have the bins returned? Well, if they're not necessary, they won't be returned. But we can get a list of where they were missing from. The stickers I don't quite understand. I don't understand what the issues is. The stickers for what exactly?
So basically, these are stickers we supply to our litter picking volunteer force, who put a sticker on a bag they leave next to a bin to identify, recruit additional volunteers, and then it also flags to the council that it's come from their provision. These are stickers that we're purchasing from ward improvement funds, etc. But we're doing it on a persistent basis now. And in effect, they are doing street cleansing services free of charge on a virtually rolling basis. So it would be sensible, I would think, for the council just to fund them, just give them the stickers, whatever they want, on a regular basis, because it's so much cheaper than employing additional council officers.
I understand, but just recently we changed the Norse bin liners from black to blue. I don't know if you're aware of that. And if they just leave a blue Norse bag next to a bin, if they supplied with blue Norse bags, then that should be adequate.
Yeah, this is about advertising their group so that people go, oh, there's a little picture group that I can join, and they scan the QR code and get contacted by Mary and join their force. Okay,
well, I'll look at that outside of this, but I would have thought that the blue bags, maybe we can get something on that, but I don't know. I think that... Yeah, we will wait for at least a year's worth of data, because I think that anything sooner will be probably unreliable, because the QR codes are only just got on the bins across the patch, and then it's going to take some time for people to recognise that what they are and what their usage is, etc. So I would say in a year's time we will have the data.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your report. Very comprehensive, as usual. Just 2 points, really. One is quite a minor point. On page 41, under paragraph 210, bereavement service invested, you've got the report on the bereavement, on the improvements to all the cemeteries and stuff like that. The quote of the £250,000 capital projects. Do you know the source of that funding?
That was in the capital budget last year for this year's spend.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And then the other point I wanted to make was on page 46, and it's just by way of saying thank you to the team. The street scene officers, particularly in my ward, have done a fabulous job, and Tony and his guys. So I just wanted to record the fact that it's brilliant, and they're working solidly, and it's non-stop, because every time they clear it, there's more. But they keep going and they don't mind, almost. But they're brilliant, so thank you for that.
Any other member? Councillor Edwards, followed by Councillor Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Hackwell, for a very good report. I just wanted to make clear, I think it's helpful, the cemetery updates, but the report doesn't sort of mention one of the key drivers that I was involved in for updating the signs at particularly St Margaret's Cemetery. So that was actually something that I, myself, Councillor Murray and Councillor Maple put some ward funds together to pay for those new signs, because we had reports from local residents that there were a lot of people who were not behaving responsibly as dog owners, and they were letting their dogs off the leash, and we discovered that the signage was very out of date. So given that we all put quite a significant amount of our ward fund towards getting those signs, I did just want to have that noted, as it wasn't mentioned in the report. I'm very pleased that we got there in the end and the signs look great, but it was definitely, that's how it came about. I also wanted to praise the work of Tony and the street scene team. I've been working with a lot on persistent fly tipping areas in my ward, particularly one on Fort Street, and I worked with local residents to get the evidence base for a CCTV mobile camera to be put in, and then when that wasn't quite doing the job, I sort of spoke to Tony, and earlier in the year he and the police went door to door in the area, sort of talking to people, explaining what counted as fly tipping, what didn't. And since that intervention earlier in the year, it does seem to have done the trick. So I really appreciate the work that they're doing, and I understand, from Tony, they have huge resource constraints. There's lots of problems getting staff and retaining staff. So I do just want to sort of record my thanks for the work that they've been doing, because I definitely felt that they've been going above and beyond and working very closely with me to fix the issue, and I really appreciate it. The other two areas that I wanted to cover was the bins issue, where the location, because of the audit, has found not to be suitable. Are those bins then being put somewhere else in a more suitable location, or are they just disappearing? Because I obviously know that I presume the Norse contract is for X number of bins, because every time I've ever asked, can we put a bin here, they say, well, yeah, you could use ward funds to pay for the bin, but under the Norse contract, they wouldn't clear it, so that's not something that we can do. So I'm thinking, if we're taking away bins, we should at least be putting them in better locations, and not just sort of, I guess, making it easier for Norse when they're contracted, presumably, to do a set number of bins. And I think it would be good if that is possible, to move them to new locations, that ward councillors are involved in those discussions. I definitely don't think that we should be losing bins. I understand that some might not be in suitable locations, but if Norse is being paid to empty set number of bins, then they should be emptying them. And then just a final question, really, on anything else that could be done about the dog fouling, which is the measures that you've been doing are described on, I think, page 51. And you've been working with, the council's been working with children through schools, which is really great. But, how do we really tackle adults? Because they're the ones that I see doing, sort of allowing this to happen and not cleaning up after their dogs. And, whenever I have visitors come to Medway, it is something, unfortunately, that they say, there's a real problem with dog fouling. And I haven't seen a really noticeable presence of, signs detailing fines that might act as a deterrent. I appreciate that it's probably quite difficult to have somebody who can issue a fixed penalty notice and to spot somebody at that particular time. But I'm just wondering if signs might just act as a deterrent and show that the council cares about this and that it takes it seriously, and that if you are seen to be allowing your dog to foul on Medway streets, somebody might take a picture of you and report it, because the council cares about it very much. So just interested in any thoughts you've had on more that could be done to tackle dog fouling in Medway.
Well, thank you, Councillor Edwards. Well, first, I'd echo that Tony and his team do a fantastic job. They really do. They're reactive and proactive. And we have done a little bit of restructuring in the team to make it a little bit more easier for him to retain his staff. So there's a moves internally that we made to try and help him. With the Norse contract and the bins, the Norse contract, as you know, is renegotiated often. Doesn't fall under my portfolio, and so I'm sure that there's a contracted amount of bins. I mean, we've got over 1,400 bins in Medway, and that will form part of the Norse contract of whether it gets reduced or those bins get replaced and stuff like that. But as I say, the Norse contract doesn't fall under my portfolio, even though the wardens do for waste. The Norse contract doesn't. Okay, the dog fouling. I agree with you. Signs do help. I mean, I've had some put up in my ward. You know, reminding people that could be up to £1,000 fine, and we've also had pavement stenciled where we get specific areas that dogs cause a problem. So all of those things help, but we have, as local ward councillors, have to be the eyes and ears on the ground to know where those specific areas are. So if you get complaints from your residents, then please let Ruth and her team know, and they will go out and put some signs up and stenciling up. It's quite an easy job. Whether that does any good, it's, as you say, it's very difficult to catch a dog in the act, but we try. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elizabeth Turpin.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Hackwell, for the report. Mine was just a fairly quick question, I think, regarding stray dogs. I note that since May 22, we've got this agreement with Battersea Dogs Home. So I just wanted to know what the financial implications of that were, because it's not mentioned in the report, and I'm assuming there is financial.
It's around. It's around not having the responsibility to rehome dogs and the skills and all those sorts of things. So we've actually basically subcontracted the job to Battersea Dogs Home. I don't believe it. Ruth might be able to help me, but I don't believe it actually costs us any money to go to Battersea Dogs Home.
I'm pretty certain it doesn't cost us any money, no. I mean, I'll certainly look into it just in case, but it's not my understanding.
I was quite surprised by that, because it's obviously, if something we were doing, that's quite a commitment. I assume we have to perhaps provide that we've tried to sort of find the owners or something, or, you know, I do, we see it on Facebook quite a bit, so it looks like we do, you know, we do try hard with that.
We do. I mean, the Facebook page has got a lot of followers.
Yeah.
We do lost and found or stray dogs, and we also keep them for 7 days. So there's a 7-day period which those dogs stay in Medway before they get rehomed by Battersea, which are probably one of the world's best dog rehomers.
Any other member? Oh, Councillor Rupert.
Yeah, I really like the QR codes on the bins. I've mentioned it to a few residents and it's not got out there quite. Maybe it's either not all the bins have been done with a label, or it is that they haven't noticed it and there's not been any publicity about it. So it might be worthwhile doing a bit of publicity about that. With regards to street cleansing, I've had a few complaints from residents. A lot of it is around perennially, or it's around leaves getting into the gutter. So it might not be technically on the pavement, but it's the leaves swirling around and they get into the gutter, and then that can block up the the gullies. So that is a bit of an issue. Do you cover that issue, or is that Councillor Filmer? And is there, you know, do your team monitor that as well to keep that working? Because I know it's quite difficult because the cars are parked there as well, but it's something that residents are noticing.
So the QR codes, I agree with you. I mean, it's been a fantastic addition. I still think that personally the form's a bit clunky when you go in there, but that's a different issue that we need to resolve. But it's a good way of. I reported one myself last week, and it does work because it was empty the next day, so it does work. The leaves are part of the. I mean, as you know, that we send the scarabs round after bin day every 2 weeks, I think, and they pick up most of the leaves. But if the waste wardens actually notice there's a lead or detritus or anything like that, then they will contact Norse and get them to clean up. So it's part of the normal job. But as we know, the scarabs go around and parked cars are there and they don't get cleared up.
Yeah. Just lastly, on the Battersea, I mean, the 7 days. I'm just wondering, has anyone contacted you after the 7 days and said, "I'm missing my dog, I've been looking for him for a week"? And
not that I've been made aware of.
Yeah.
It might have happened, but I've not been made aware of that.
I'm just a bit worried that someone's lovely dog is going to be, you know, in Battersea Dogs Home in a short period of time. But yeah,
I think that's the legislation, the 7 days that we keep them for. But obviously, if people do and the dog's gone off to Battersea, then we give them the details. And more often than not, I would imagine the poor dog is still there, waiting to be rehomed.
Any other member? No? Oh, sorry, Councillor Brown.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you for the report. Actually, it's one of the easier ones for us to read, and I thank you for that, and I thank you to the officers that assisted with that. Again, it's about the waste and trade waste. The enforcement side of things is what kind of interests me here, because in the past we used to look not just at the number of incidents, but also at the amount of money we recovered, or the costs versus what we recovered in either fixed penalty notices or further action. It's kind of a funny question, but I have people who think that we do nothing around this, and I think this is a bit about communication, and I might ask if you could think about going forward as regards how we actually demonstrate to our residents that action is being taken, because what we are seeing is brilliant work going on to remove fly tipping. In some areas, there's been a partial improvement because of the intervention of officers along with the police talking to people. But actually, I think the majority of residents, and especially in my ward, think that actually there's no consequence to this. And I think maybe if it would be suitable to do it at some point, that actually a campaign needs to be run around communicating the consequences, especially for some of the, I would say, hard cases, difficult to resolve. Maybe sorry.
We do communicate, especially the large ones. I mean, there was one over in over in Who that was a huge one. It was like a commercial fly tipping. I went and visited the site, and it was I just didn't believe how much waste was there, and that went to court, and it was in the paper, and it was, so we do publicise big wins when we get them in the local paper. We don't necessarily publicise the small fridges and things. We tend to try and work with encouragement with people in that case, rather than go down the fixed penalty route straight away. So we offer them warnings first and those sorts of things. So if it's commercial fly tipping, then we go and we do publicise it. But I take your point that we could do more. We could do more to publicise the fines and and the things that we could do. It's just the mediums we do that. Maybe something in Medway Matters in the future or something like that. Maybe a good way of getting that information out there to all residents.
Yeah, thank you for that, because it's actually the fridge in the back alley that matters.
Yeah.
Any other member? In that case, then, thank you for being here today, and I'll hand over to the Vice Chairman. Thank you.
I've noted that you've promised to give a list of the bins that you've moved in Prince's Park Ward to Councillor Lamas. That you're going to publicise the fines, put more publicity around the fines for fly tipping, and more publicity around the QR codes. Was there anything else?
If I may, Chair, regarding the bin questioning, the breakdown of waste warden visits by ward, the map and location of bins audited in Q2 for removal and replacement by ward, and a commitment to discuss arrangements for ongoing support for volunteer groups. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to agenda item 9, Innovation Park Medway. And I believe we're going directly to Sunny for people's questions, members' questions. Any member?
Sorry, Chair, may I just mention, item 8 came through as a supplementary. Is that going to be discussed or not? Because I had a question on it.
I don't think I've received that, sorry.
was quite late because it was held up for some reason.
Right, okay, so this is supplementary agenda number 1 for Shared Prosperity Fund Investment Plan submission. For members who haven't received that, including me, I'm going to literally take 2 minutes to read it. Okay, I'll carry on reading this. Any member who'd like to start on this, please? Councillor Curry, obviously.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think, as far as I'm aware, it's just an information item, but it refers to the Year 2 funding, both of the Multiply Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund, is now starting to happen. I was just wondering what the timescales were and when we can apply, or when, not say we, when we can tell our community groups to apply, and what's the process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So in answer to that question, when I mentioned earlier around struggling to recruit, so at the moment I'm trying to recruit a Shared Prosperity Fund team. So we're doing it very much on existing sort of day jobs, if you like. I've managed to recruit one person into the team, but despite that, we still managed to get Year 1 away, as is updated on there. In answer to Year 2, we are hoping to launch it and release the funding in the first quarter of 23-24. That's for the Shared Prosperity Fund. Multiply is much more, is a very specific investment plan, a very specific thing where basically the local authority just procures services. So we have said what we will do, if you like. That's not to say that we won't consult people, but it's not a grant system, which the Shared Prosperity Fund is, yeah, where we are able to grant bidders, appropriate bidders, who hit the right criteria as mentioned in the report, as laid out in the report.
Quickly, a quick question on 2.2.4 and 2.3.1. What's the success criteria you're putting in place to measure this?
We've got, at the moment, we're pulling together, if you like, as part of the bid, a bidding sort of prospectus, if you like, and in that we'll have the sort of E numbers, as we've gone through there, and all of the various 6 sort of things that people need to hit. There is an element of, if you like, subjective view of that. So, for example, if they say we think it's going to be Pride in Place, it's an event, as an example, and we expect to draw X thousand people to the town centre and highlight, for example, our city centre, Chatham. So, for example, Light Nights is a key example of that. We're still, obviously, reeling from the success of that in terms of delivered by my colleague, AD in Culture and Events, where we had 50,000 people. So that is a clear measure, if you like, of Pride in Place around the majority of Medway people coming and enjoying Medway as a place and having pride in it. So it's a rather crude example, but we will have a number of criteria that we will try and measure.
Okay, thank you for that answer. But coming back to my question on 2.3.1, the main objective is to improve numeracy skills in adults aged 19 plus. So I'm just trying to understand how you're going to measure the success of that. And are you taking any into consideration any special needs that any of those adults have?
So I can come back with more detail on that. So apologies, I couldn't quite get to the number, so I thought you were referring to Shared Prosperity Fund. In terms of the Multiply, again, I have every confidence that Daniel and my team has ways of measuring this. So again, I can come back with you in more detail.
So we note the progress on the Shared Prosperity Fund and the Multiplier Fund, and we wish it all the best in the forthcoming year. We note the Year 1 outcomes as providing this report, and we look forward to another report. Would that be in a year's time? Or
I'm happy to come back whenever the board feels that they need an update.
Dare I suggest in 6 months?
Apologies. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that agreed?
yeah, in the light of the recruitment difficulties, I think that would be good. Yeah.
In that case, then, we do move on to agenda item 9, the Innovation Park Medway. And I believe it's questions back to Sunny again, so any member? No? In that case, then we move on very quickly. If the
Thank you. I did have a couple of questions. Is it the case that there's still nobody who has yet signed up on the dotted line to occupy the site? And I'm also interested in what the failed levelling up 2 bid might mean for IPM. I also have some concerns about the advertising strategy. I don't really know how you're going to attract the type of company you're seeking, this kind of sort of high value research and development company with a marketing strategy that seems quite reliant on ads on buses. And I think it's a real concern that we won't get any takers for those sites. And I do think that marketing strategy needs to be looked at again, particularly as the risk of not getting enough takers for that site or occupants for that site is deemed a significant and critical risk in the paper. So that is a big concern for me that I wanted to put on the record. I also have some concerns that what might happen if we don't get enough occupiers is that the council may decide to take on extra construction risks that weren't envisioned at the time of the plan. That kind of build it and they will come approach, which I think leaves us with a white elephant risk that I really want to avoid. And then finally, if I could also just get some information, a little bit more information on that second risk in the risk management table, which sounds like it's crystallised rather than the usual kind of hypothetical scenario that we consider. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. In terms of the failed bid and what does this mean? So again, there was an element of opportunism there where obviously the funding came up, it ticked a number of boxes. And again, relating to your kind of point around there is risk around build it and they will come. Why risk it if we can make it viable using government funding? So there was an element of opportunism there. It just means that we need to review very carefully, and as you said, that if we are going to build it, we know who we're building it for and we're reducing the risk as much as possible. So that is paused and we're reviewing that business case now that we know we haven't got round 2. And obviously we're waiting to see what happens with round 3 because it may be that round 3 is an opportunity. So again, there is no rush to go out there and build it in the hope that they will come. Yeah, so that's the first answer to that. In terms of the marketing, noted and understood around buses, there are other things that we're doing. So we are working with Locate in Kent. We are looking at, if you like, sort of motorways and areas where we know that people may be more aware of in terms of these kind of sites and wanting to look for somewhere outside of London. We're also looking at advertising in London. So at the moment we are working on that marketing as we speak. We're using a national as well property consultant as well in the hope that we can capture a wider market rather than, like you said, somebody waiting at a bus stop in Medway as an example. So that is more around augmenting rather than being the marketing strategy. So we are looking at other things. In terms of an occupier, we have a heads of terms agreed. We have to, on the southern site, but we can't go until we've completed, we can't reveal who they are, and that is also tied up with the building. So the one building where we are build it and they will come is dependent on this deal coming through, and we should know in the next 1 to 2 months whether that's definitely happening, but we are practically there with it. But hopefully we'll have some good news in 2 months. The LDO risk, so when we originally looked at the local development order, so this was around saying to basically taking out the hassle for developers and businesses coming on board. If you imagine everyone has an individual planning application, they have to have individual traffic assessments, ecological assessments, etc. So the whole point of the local development order was to do that for the businesses so that they can have a self-certification process. So as long as they follow the guides and what we had done, they wouldn't need to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on that work. And obviously delays and risk around whether or not they would get that building. That was the purpose of the LDO, but again, it was done 3-4 years ago. And actually, when we first did it, we always said that we would need to refresh it as quickly as possible once we've had it in force, if you like, for the first year to two. Now, since then, we've had COVID. Obviously, we've had different ways of working. There are slightly different demands on the workforce. We don't feel threatened because it is light industrial, it is research and development. These are not jobs that you can normally do from home. But actually, it's a good point to refresh the LDO, as we always intended to make sure that we are fit for purpose in terms of the current work environment, if you like, and it still works. So we are looking at reviewing that, but it was something that we were always planning to do, and it's absolutely, looking at what's happened in the last 3 years, is exactly what we should be doing.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Just one final question. Have you had anybody sort of sign on the dotted line to be an occupant on the northern site?
So we're working with 3 other potential tenants on the northern site, but not on the dotted line yet, but we're pretty optimistic about them, but apologies, because of the commerciality and the sensitivity of it, I can't reveal who they are or where we are with them.
Thank you. Councillor Rupert Turpin, please.
Thanks. Just as a local member in this area, I have shared my concerns, and I don't want you to stray into anything commercially confidential or anything, but I've just been a bit concerned about the, I guess the capacity is partly, you've got issues, so many, a lot on your plate. I can't believe that you're doing all the stuff on the Hoo Peninsula, etc., and this. But it just, we did ask before for a list of just how many meetings have been had by the steering group or the member group, the one which Councillor Jarrett's on. And in terms of, we've got no idea how many meetings have been had, and we were refused access to the minutes. But it'd be nice to know how many meetings that have been had, so that it should be, I think, for a project of this importance, at least monthly. But it'd be interesting to know, who's on that board, and I think we were told who was on the board at one point, but how many meetings have been had, and that it really is a case of keep on grinding on, because I know there, having served on projects, sometimes you do, a good, well-run project has a meeting at least once a month, and even if there doesn't seem much to discuss, you can have a short meeting. But there's millions of pounds going into this, and it has been significantly delayed. Don't know what the issues is with the heads of terms, but I really wish you all the best in getting those signatures. And I know you're not, from the sound of what's written in the paper, you aren't taking easy answers. Maybe people are trying to drive a hard bargain with you, and you're holding to your gun. So that's good. And I just wish you every success with that, because I think it's a great location. And yes, you've had a lot of difficulties over the period of time with COVID, and it could be a blessing in disguise that the working from home and that sort of aspect has already happened, and we've lived through that change in our way of work. And so whoever goes in there now will go in there with their eyes open, with new ways of working already in mind, however that emerges.
I can respond that on a member basis, we meet quarterly. At my level, I meet once a month. So again, I'm all over this from an assistant director perspective, because I think that's quite unusual to meet on a project basis, on a monthly basis. And the project team and my head of service meet bi-weekly, and then obviously there are numerous meetings in between in terms of the team. So there is a lot of information going around, and there's quite a lot of time sort of dedicated to this. I tend to see it as half glass full in terms of the hybrid working being an opportunity. It means we can get more businesses in there, because if they need less space, that means we can get more businesses on. So I feel there's actually an opportunity there, and it's something that we can work on. But thank you for your support.
Councillor Lammers.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add my agreement to some of the comments made by Councillor Edwards with regard to the marketing, I think your verbal reassurance were absolutely right about going to London. And could the record reflect my thanks to Tracy Crouch, who I think has agreed to move her constituency office to Innovation Park Medway. Is that correct? I think that is a really good idea, and I'd like to thank her on the record for that. Thank you, Chair.
Any other member? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Councillor T.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tony. I mean, in light of the changes in the ways of working, what market analysis has been done to determine what appetite we have for this sort of provision?
So working with Locating Kent and working with our property consultants, there are no concerns around, so we basically looked at research and development, sort of high-tech, high GVA, sort of engineering elements, and not, if you like, the dirty industries or anything particularly loud. There's obviously, in terms of the office and sort of service uses, the innovation angle. Everything points towards people wanting that space, but it not being fit for purpose. So that's part of why we have the LDO. That's part of why we're looking at, in terms of building the building on the southern site, part of why we looked at buildings for the round 2, which we're going to pause on and wait. So we've got a number of people who have an appetite to either buy the land and develop it directly themselves, or others, as the one that we've agreed the heads of terms, that don't want anything to do with the building other than specifying it and want us to build it. So there is an appetite, but I think, as was noted by Councillor Turpin, we've had way more. We've had about, I think, in the region of about 9 serious offers in terms of we'd like to do this, but they weren't appropriate for the site. So in terms of whether it would be for job density, whether it was the level of jobs, not only just the numbers, but in terms of, you know, we don't want a warehouse, if you like. We want something that's got a number of jobs for local people. And in total, we want 3,000 jobs on the site. So there is an appetite for it, but yes, it isn't easy. But again, we're not getting any warning signs yet around it being any form of failure of any sort. So we've got the 1 nearly signed up, and we've got 3 very interested parties that we're dealing with on the northern site. And I think once we get something out of the ground, and once those people take that forward, I think things will become a lot easier. Also, as well, in terms of the northern site, we're nearly there. We're finishing the infrastructure and the runway park. I think that will make a difference. And once we start populating that with buildings, and again, if we get the marketing right, we can then, I think, sort of roll forward. But yeah, I'm not claiming it's easy, but the appetite is there at the moment.
Any other member? In that case, I hand over to the Vice Chairman.
The committee notes the report on Innovation Park Medway, and we wish for the success of the marketing of this project.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 10. Can I remind all members that anything that is greyed out is not for this committee? And secondly, any questions posed, can we actually be directed to the page in the specific area, please, to allow all members to review? Thank you. Any? None. In that case, then, we move on. No. You caught me out. So we go on to agenda item 11, the work programme. I'm not quite sure that we can actually influence this at all, to be honest, except for in terms of the local plan. There were a number of issues late last year in terms of the local plan coming forward into Regulation 18, because a number of those reports were invalid or just didn't exist. So the only thing I would recommend for members to consider for the next meeting of the Regeneration Committee is that those reports come before this committee as well, so they can be scrutinised and make sure they're fit for purpose. Is that accepted? Agreed. In that case then, I thank you very much for your attendance this evening and declare this meeting closed.